Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Does it sound okay? All right. Thank you, Blue Microphones, for the Yeti USB mic.
We have a white background logo somewhere, right?
Yep. Just like a flat picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is graphic design, logos. If you choose the JPEG of any logo, the JPEG will have the white background.
Oh, yeah.
PNG will have the clear background.
Not gonna work.
So you can share my screen.
Mm-hmm.
So are you going to be controlling that?
I'm sending this thing, okay?
Yep. So after that gets sent, someone could basically just hop in any second.
Yep.
All right. Should I keep my microphone muted until we want to start? Do you have yours muted?
You can hear me now, right? You can't hear me?
Try again.
Yeah, I'm on there.
Yeah,
It's delayed.
No, my phone was down.
Yeah, I'm on there. Delayed.
No, my
know that there's a lag with them.
Right.
My microphone is not on.
I don't hear anything. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. I can hear myself from yours too.
Really?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Let's talk about the grid method.
What do you want to know, buddy?
Let's talk about grading. So when you're grading, how does that work? What does your grade book look like?
It's a little bit different than your standard grade book. I actually have a great example. Give me a minute here. So when you're talking about grading, you want to make sure that you're assessing the work that the students are doing and the knowledge that they have, not the tasks that they're completing. For example, you don't want to.
That's it's not showing the presentation mode.
It's not.
Go back to Hangout screen. Make sure to share on the right thing.
Yeah. It's because presentation mode is for like another computer, like a screen.
Mm-hmm.
So this computer still thinks that that's what's on the screen. So crap.
So I was right at the very beginning.
Again, which is just an PDF.
Yes, you were.
It's okay. That's not going to be a big deal if that's what it looks like.
Well, because we can still do this. So the most important part about grading is that regardless of how you're grading, you should be focusing on completion and mastery of the learning targets, not completion of tasks. For example, your grade book should say something like the student can complete a differential equation without error, not the student completed worksheet 4.6.
Gotcha.
So there's also different things you can do within the system. You can do mastery that's standards based. You can do mastery that's targets based, or you can do mastery and assessment based. So these are sort of the three options I give people working within the system. And mastery and standards based means that you're just going to give them a total score on how they did on the complete grid. So because each grid is generally covering one standard, as opposed to breaking that into the targets in the grade book, you're just going to grade them on what percentage did you master that standard. And mastery that's target based is each target that shows up on the grid is put into the grade book. And then the student is given a score on that. Mastery and assessment based is you're going to give the student a grade on their progress through the grid, but you're also going to give them a score on how they did on the summative assessment that you gave them. So you can either combine those scores, you can average those scores, you can keep them separate, but then there's two forms of measurement. So I've had teachers do all of these things, and it really just depends on how you were grading before, what you're comfortable with, and what works for you.
Very cool.
And then there's other stuff with grading here too. Is that any better?
No, I can hear them. It's okay. Just what it is. I actually just invited them all via email.
The participants. Oh, so they're gonna get the link directly too.
Yeah.
Nice.
From Google.
Should I mute my mic right now?
There it is.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear us? Or hear me at least? Oh, I lost you. You were on there now. I can't hear you anymore.
Can you hear me at all?
I can hear you. I can't hear Katie anymore.
You there, Katie?
She was there. Katie, if you can hear us, we can't hear your audio anymore.
Can you wave if you can hear us?
Hmm.
Like her image froze.
It looks like she's muted. Katie, are you muted? Yeah, it's showing that she's muted. Hmm. I'm not sure.
Katie, can you hear us okay?
We can see you, but we can't hear you. Looks like we're sitting on a... We're riding in a car with her. Hmm. She was there. I could hear her. Now it's showing her as muted.
How you doing, Katie? Can you hear me?
She's still muted.
Can you give me a wave if you can hear me?
She might got back. Oh, she was unmuted for a second.
Is that better? Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you good. Yeah. I don't know if we lost Katie or not. Her picture's no longer there. She is showing.
I was excited to hang out with Katie when she comes back.
I wonder if she might have bad connection in the car.
Stephanie did not get the link for 8 p.m.
What's that?
I got someone who... I'm forwarding you this email. Stephanie Kirkland.
Okay.
She did not get the link.
Bounced.
There's no link on that email.
What?
Like Stephanie was trying to get on. She doesn't have the link.
Yeah, that was the one that went out this morning. Sent her another email. She must not have gotten it. I'm just gonna invite her straight from.
Sure.
There's been 2 more emails since that one.
That said they didn't get it.
I'm back there. Let her know it's gonna come from Jeff Eddie and on multimedia. What's her name?
Stephanie Kirkland. How's that sound? Can anyone hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Can't hear me.
All right. Send the link to Stephanie. Did you send me the link and I'll respond to her email that she sent me, just in case there's a typo on
I
it.
did that too.
Oh, you did?
I'll send it. Just say
What happened? How you doing there, Katie? You out there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Were you driving earlier? We thought it was like an unsafe use of Google Hangouts for a minute.
Oh, I'm a passenger, so it's okay.
Oh, so that's good. How you doing tonight?
Good, how are you?
I'm fantastic. You getting ready for your school years to start here?
Yeah.
So where are you from?
Couple weeks. Michigan,
Okay.
Detroit
Are
area.
you, okay, and what do you teach?
Chemistry.
Okay, fantastic. What year are you in? How many years have you been teaching?
I've been teaching for 2. This will be my 3rd.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So just so I know, where did you hear about the grid method?
I met you at the Woodrow Wilson conference.
Okay,
a couple
fantastic.
weeks
I was
back.
thinking, yeah, I think I remember you. I was just confirming in my head that you were the person I thought you were. So how's
Yep.
how's everything been since then?
It's going well. Started
Fantastic.
playing around making some grids for my chemistry classes and what I want my units to look like.
Okay, how's that going for you? You having any issues? Anything you want to sort of talk through?
Doing okay with the grids themselves. I'm just trying to figure out how to fit it into the grading system that I'm stuck with at school.
Sure, and I think we talked about that a little bit at the conference. If you want, I can show you how I set up my grade book, if you think that
I
would be
would
helpful.
love that. Yeah.
Can you can see the screen okay?
It comes and goes, because I'm still traveling.
You're still kind of... Okay. So, grading in this system, the most important piece of it is to make sure you're grading students on mastery and not on tasks they complete. So, as they complete things, you want to make sure you're not saying things in your grade book like, you completed worksheet 3.4. You want to make sure you're saying things, you can balance an equation properly, or you can successfully write a 2-step equation, or calculate the molar, solution that is created by this. So you want to make sure your gradebook reflects the mastery of the standard that you're covering. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so can you see what's on the screen now? It's like a presentation that you can hopefully view.
Yeah, what should be graded and then just change.
Yes, okay. Yes, okay, so there's a few different ways that I tell teachers. Like, the nice thing about the grid method is that there's flexibility within the system. And that flexibility sort of allows you some freedom to what you grade and how you grade. So there's standards-based mastery grading, which means that the only thing you're putting in your gradebook is going to be the standards themselves. So if, I don't know how many standards you're including in your grids, so let's say one grid's covering the bulk of one standard. So however far a student would get in the grid, whatever percentage that would be, would just be their grade. Does that make sense?
Can you repeat that again? I'm sorry.
Absolutely. So if you do standards-based mastery grading, that means your gradebook's going to just have the standards from the state standards in the gradebook. And then whichever standards align to that grid, so like let's say a student gets 85% of their grid done, they would have an 85% or an 8.5 out of 10, or however you want to put that in your gradebook, for that standard. And then as they move on and do other standard or other grids, you would then measure them that way. Does that make sense for the standards-based mastery? Okay, so now there's also target-based mastery. So If you want to have more grades for your students and you want them to be a little bit deeper in terms of more fine-tipped, if that makes sense, you can do target-based grading. And that's when you take, how you develop your targets for your grid. That means every one of those targets, level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4, are going to have a grade in your grade book. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So that's what I call mastery-based assessment, which means you're essentially grading the student based on how far did they get in the grid. And the nice thing about the grid is because it's aligned to the standards from start to finish when you talk about how you're developing it and how you're developing your assessments, their progress in that grid should be a very good indicator of their mastery on the standard or on the targets that they're working on. So those are the two mastery types of grading. There's also a third thing that I tell teachers they can do if they want. So mastery is basing your entire grade book essentially on students' progress through the mastery grid, and that's basically it. Okay?
Okay.
You can also add assessments. So another thing you can do is you can take the student's mastery and then you could add an assessment grade. So at the end of a unit, if you want to give everyone a summative assessment that maybe wasn't on the grid, what you could do is you could take all of their scores from the mastery on the grid, and then you could combine it with the score of the assessment. And you could do whatever you want with that. You could average it, you could just add them together for a total score, or, that's up to you, essentially, what your grade book, if that makes sense. So do those three sort of types of grading make sense to you?
Yes. I have a question about the target one, though.
Sure.
So with the target one, I would have maybe like 4 targets per grid.
Okay. Sure.
And then they would have 1 grade for each target.
Right. Yes.
Where does that grade
Or
come from?
So do you know from the assessment and completion of the squares? So
Okay,
each one
so
of those squares in the. Go ahead.
So I guess I'm trying to figure out what it would, if I'm a student, trying to figure out where does my grade come from. Is it from me as the teacher looking at all of their work and just saying, okay, proficient or mastered or whatever, or is it from a specific assessment that was maybe one of those boxes was a specific assessment?
That's essentially up to you. I prefer to use their progress on the grid in total. So when I design my grids, I'm very purposefully sort of creating them in the way that I know that the farther a student is, the more material that they've mastered. So if you look on your screen right now, hopefully you can see this example. So this would be an example of if you have like 4 separate targets, okay? And when I say level 1 target, I mean the level 1 target that would be to the left of all the assignments in level 1 on the grid. Are you with me?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm just making sure. So let's say that the student on the grid, okay, would reach level 4A. So that means they finished all of level 1, all of level 2, all of level 3, and they started the project or whatever you have on 4A. So one way you could grade that is you could say the level 1 target, they got a 10 out of 10 because they showed mastery on that target and they completed that entire level. Level 2 target, they got a 10 out of 10 because they completed that entire level. Level 3, they have a 10 out of 10 because they completed the entire level. But let's say they only started the project, they didn't really get all the way done with it, or they got most of it done but didn't finish it. Maybe they got a 7 out of 10 on level 4. So you could also add optional assignments here, if you see on the far right of the slide here. You could also add a test score in if you wanted to. But the way I grade when in my class and the way I recommend grading is using their progress on the grid, so that if you add those numbers together, there's 40 total points, and then it'd be a 37 out of 40, which would be a 92%.
Okay.
So does that example help you at all?
Yes it does.
So you can, because one thing you're going to have to contend with, especially because I'm assuming you're at high school chemistry?
Yep.
So those standards are fairly beefy. So there's going to be a lot to each of those targets or each of those levels of the grid. So what you have to decide is, can you group could you group some of those targets into a single statement for level 1 and then put that as your level 1 target, if that makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that way, so if it's balancing equations and calculating percent yield or something, and those are two very similar things. I mean, they're probably not, now that I'm thinking about it, but you could put those both in level 1 and then grade the student on that.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing you could do is you could really dial down and know exactly which assessments are for which targets and then base it on mastery then. The only danger there is you're then only giving the student maybe one chance to master a target as opposed to multiple chances if you're spiraling all that information. So,
Okay.
so like I said, there really is a lot of flexibility sort of in the system. Hopefully that example helped a little bit. I'm hoping.
Yeah.
But it's really about making it work for you. I mean, that's essentially what I've seen teachers have labs separate too. So like they'll have tests and and then they'll add labs as well, but the labs won't be on the grid because they have to do them in a specific time period or something like that, or they only get the lab twice a week, or I don't know what your current scenario is. But you can also say, this is your grid grade, so this is how far you got on your mastery grid, this is your lab grade, and this is your test grade at the end of the unit. And then you can weight those differently or weight them all the same depending on how you want to sort of look at it. I prefer, but I'm biased, doing a more fully mastery-based, like, if I design the grid correctly, their progress on that grid should represent their mastery on the standard. That's my personal sort of bias and belief with that. So hopefully that sort of helps answer that question. So is there anything else you're sort of wrestling with?
That was the main thing.
You feel pretty good about that then, now? Hopefully?
Yeah, that helped kind of separate out the options and
Sure.
yeah, that example was helpful for sure.
Thank you. Okay, good. That's what I wanted to hear. Okay, so we have a question. Okay, fantastic. All right, fantastic. Thanks, Jeff, for keeping me on it. Yeah, so Megan had a great question. She wants me to talk a little bit about goal setting and how to have students do goal setting. So I'm going to show you exactly how I do goal setting in my classroom and exactly how I teach other teachers to do goal setting as well. If you give me a minute. So goal writing. Hopefully Megan can see this. I'm hoping she can. So when you do goal writing, there's actually a worksheet that we can probably share that with the people from the Hangout. So I will share that. We will make sure we share that out to you guys, especially with Megan when she asked the question. But I essentially have this sheet, as you can see on the right side of the slide here, and that sheet includes several things. It has the date, it has the learning target, it has what learners are working on, and it has what they would like to learn or complete. Because all of these components are really important to focusing students, it allows them to be aware of their progress and their tasks and the learning that they will accomplish. So let's talk about the routine. So what really matters is, what does this look like in the classroom? So you saw the worksheet, and that's fine, but how do you get students engaged? How do you get them focused? So I actually do this as a think, pair, share, and I think that's the most effective way to increase accountability. So goal writing is the first step. So when the students walk in, they have their folders or their portfolios or wherever they're keeping all their work. I strongly recommend like the 3-prong folders. You can get them for like 79 cents or like 20 cents a piece if you find a good sale. So you can buy one of those for all your students, or you can have them on the supply list. And they keep their goal sheet in their front pocket. And so the first 2 to 3 minutes of class is going to be them writing their goal silently. So that goal is going to include the target that they write for that day or that they're working on. That's going to include what they want to accomplish. It's also going to include the date. I then have them share with a classmate. So turn to your table partner or talk to the person across from you or something like that. And I let them tell it to someone else. And then I discuss as a class. So I'll randomly choose a couple of students to either share their goal, and then after a student shares their goal, it's a nice idea to have them choose the next student that's going to share their goal. Because the nice thing is that if they've all shared with their table partner already, they all should have a goal written. And as they're writing their goals, you can sort of walk around and monitor that as it progress. Goal writing is one of those weird things that when I first started teaching, I didn't think was really useful. I was worried about wasting class time, but since implementing this system, goal writing has become a foundation for focusing my students and getting them ready for the day, especially in high needs urban environments. Having that routine where they silently walk in and start writing their goals is a fantastic way to get them settled, get them focused, and then the best part is they are completely focused on their learning, what they have to do, and what they need for the day. So that's also where the discussion part comes in. So after they've shared with each other, you can discuss it as a class. So this is where you can bring up things like maybe there's some things that you're noticing students are getting stuck on. So you can sort of review some basic questions or do what I like to call a skill drill, which could be anything from a 2-minute video that you watch as a class after you do your goals, or it could be maybe just a quick discussion to make sure they understand what they're supposed to. So Megan, I'm hoping as you're watching on YouTube right now that helped sort of you understand the goal writing process. If it didn't, please email us back. The other question you had, Megan, and thank you so much, was how does group work within the grid system? The goal writing process actually includes some group work already, so students are always talking to each other. So there's a few different ways that group work sort of play a role in the grid method. So it really depends on your style and how you're going to incorporate your lessons or build group work into your lessons. I will often create learning teams, especially if students are starting to get behind or struggle. I will allow them to collaborate together if they're on the same activity. So if you have 3 or 4 students, or 2 to 3 students is probably better, working on the same activity, they can actually collaborate with each other and work on that activity together. And I've found that if you give some of those students that are usually behind just someone to struggle with, that they end up helping each other out a lot more than you trying to get them to work individually. So that gives them a little bit of scaffolding, and it lets them sort of talk through their thinking with someone else, and that absolutely helps. I've also broken projects down within a mastery grid. So another cool thing you can do is you can say, okay, let's say the first row of the grid is just individual tasks, and half of the second row is also individual tasks. But on, let's say, 2C and 2D, so 2D could be pick a group and then start working on a larger project together as a group. Now the nicest part about this is, and I think most teachers agree when I say this, is that normally when you just assign groups and you start a project, you have one student doing most of the work. And that becomes very troublesome as a teacher because you have to assess every student. One of the nicest things about this method is that they've done so much individual work, and that you can ensure that they've had their own ideas before they enter into the group, which in all honesty makes the group work that much more effective. So group work can absolutely be included in the grid. What I would caution you on is allowing students to independently understand some of the foundational concepts before entering them into the group, so that they can contribute to the group as individuals. So hopefully that answers Megan's question. I don't know if hopefully we have some more questions that we can talk about. I think I have some more. Katie, anything I just talked about spark any interest from you?
Well, I had a question with the goals, for coming
Sure.
off of the goals. Do you have your students do reflections as part of their, like, is it just at the beginning, or do they revisit their goals later?
Thank you so much for bringing that up. So a lot of times during my exit slip, so if I have an exit slip or I decide to do it, part of that exit slip is always, did you reach your goal today? Or maybe if I don't want to do pencil and paper, I may do something like raise your hand if you met your goal today. And then if they did meet their goal, I have them describe how they behaved and what they did to meet that goal. If students didn't meet their goal, I have them explain what they can do better the next day. So there are absolutely ways, and I think that reflection piece is huge. So I think your head is in the perfect place, Katie, because goals only make sense if you reflect on them. So having those discussions are very, very important. So that's a fantastic point and something I would absolutely include in the process. Even if, so like let's say you have a content-based exit slip, you can still always make the first question on that exit slip, did you accomplish your goal today and how do you feel about that? So just having those discussions with students and getting them to reflect on their either their behavior or how hard they think they worked and just sort of identify that is a very huge, very large skill that you want them to be able to sort of curate while they're in your classroom. And this can absolutely help with that. Absolutely. So that's a fantastic point. Fantastic point.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So another thing that people often ask is about sort of how to close a grid out. Have you wondered about that at all?
Yeah.
So that's a very common question I get, and it's one of those things that is, once again, it's very much up to you. But there's a bunch of ways to sort of structure that in your classroom. So, just give me 2 seconds here and find what I'm looking for. So there are a few different ways you can manage learner progress and sort of implement your grid. You can have it open-ended. You can close it on a certain date, or and those are the two sort of primary options. So I actually tend to, when I'm tracking students, I tend to pick a closing date for my grid based on sort of that middle group of students. And the reason I pick them is I have students that I call PACE students. So these are the students that are doing what they're supposed to and they're working the way they're supposed to, but maybe they just work a little bit slower than everyone else. Does that make sense? So you have those students that just are doing what they need to do, but maybe they just don't do it as fast. So I call those my PACE students. And as they start to get closer to where I need them to be, that's when I start saying, okay, this student's here. That means in about 5 days we should be done with this grid. And I'm very, very explicit about that end date. So I might say about 2 weeks before, I'll say, I'm thinking most people should be here. If you're behind, you need to start working. If you're ahead, you're on. So letting them know, either with a daily target, or like a weekly target. So you might want to say, by Friday, everyone should be on this square. So if you're not, you're falling a little bit behind. If you're ahead, you're doing awesome. If you're right on there, you're on pace, so don't worry. So, but once again, the student should be controlling the pace of the class. So you really have to sort of cater to them a bit. And that does get a bit harder at the high school levels, just because the pace does have to be higher. But that's where sort of those motivational factors and keeping the students informed of where they should be on the grid come in. So the other way to structure this is completely open-ended. Now this, I would not recommend doing this when you first start implementing the system, because In order to do an open-ended system, you have to have all of your grids done. In that system, what you would do is you would basically put all of your materials and all your grids out and just have students work through them from the first day of the year to the last day of the year. And I've had teachers do that very successfully, but it does get more chaotic and it's a lot more to manage because there's so much going on at that point. The amazing thing about that, though, is then you're truly not limiting that student that needs to take more time because they don't understand the concept. So hopefully that helps explain sort of managing that learner progress a little bit better.
Do you have any strategies that you use with those students that are just always absent all the time and get behind?
Yes, I do. So when a student is not there, the nicest thing about this system I've found is that they can still work towards their learning goals if they really want to. So, and that also depends on, does the student have accessibility to the internet or technology? Do you post your stuff online? So a good thing that I try to do is put all the resources a student would need, whether they're at school or not, to keep learning somewhere online so they can access it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Especially with things like videos or maybe video lessons or lectures or PowerPoints or closed notes. Like you can, in this Google world that we live in, and in this things like Google Classroom exist, things like Edmodo exist, I would absolutely recommend putting all of the resources that go with the grid somewhere that's accessible for all students. Another thing you can honestly do is when those students come back, the nicest thing is they can pick up where they left off. You know, so if they missed 3 days, you don't have to say, well, you missed these notes, we watched this video, and you missed this lab. You get to say, okay, where were you when you left? Keep working. A lot of that also is helped by good parent communication. So another thing I did for a lot of my students that missed a lot is I would send their folders home with all of the sheets and all of the resources they would need to complete them. And they would come back sometimes and have a lot of it done. So they actually didn't fall behind. Some of the more successful students in my class would normally fail other classes, but they would pass mine because they knew what they had to do, because the grid's giving them a clear learning path from the first day of the unit to the last day of the unit. So
Okay.
Another nice thing is if you get those transient students that, like, hey, I just showed up from this district and you've been starting the unit for 2 weeks, you have a clear starting point for them. You just have them start at the beginning of the unit so they can catch up with the rest of the class. So it is really nice because you never really have to worry about students missing anything because they're all working at their own pace, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So if they're missing it, that's, you know, once again, they're owning that themselves, and that's always a good thing. So does that answer your question about the...
Yeah.
Okay.
Comment.
From Megan, how to move on from a grid, but that's already being answered. New question. This is a thorny question. Okay, so this is a really, really good question. So how do you determine how large you make a grid topic? I know everything is standards-based, but a lot of the standard statements include multiple topics and can be made into one super big grid, like combining photosynthesis and cell respiration, or splitting them up, 2 different grids. So this is really, so Megan, this is a little bit of a thorny question, but that's okay. I like those kinds of questions. So it's really up to you. What I usually tell teachers is think about the unit you would design when you're thinking about the grid you would design. If when you're teaching photosynthesis, you would like to also teach cell respiration, I would include that in one grid. If you think that the components of photosynthesis should be taught separately from cell respiration, then you might want to make that 2 grids. So I guess the question is, do you want the standards, does the standard focus on energy creation in living organisms, or does the standard focus on only photosynthesis and then only cellular respiration? So I'm not as familiar as I'd like to be with the biology and the high school biology standards, but I do understand biology because that's what my degree's in. But so if the focus of the standard is I can understand generally how living things produce energy, whether it be photosynthesis or cellular respiration, you would want to put that into one grid because the overarching theme is energy. But if the focus of the standard or one of the standards is just photosynthesis and the other standard is just cellular respiration and there's a big, huge standard connected to it, you may want to do two different grids. So what I'm going to say, and the easiest way to answer this question is, when you teach this unit, are both of these included in a single unit when you teach it, or do you teach them as two separate units? And then I would then say, create the grid how you would break the units up for your class, for your students. So Megan, hopefully that answers the question about breaking them up. But ultimately, you know your content, you know what your students work best, and you know what's worked. So I think it wouldn't be too hard to talk about, on level 1, general energy topics, whether you're talking about mitochondria, ATP, and sort of those basic foundational concepts. And then maybe level 2 focuses on photosynthesis, or the first part of level 2 focuses on photosynthesis, and then the second part of level 2 could focus on cellular respiration. Then when you get to level 3, they're going to be doing some comparing and contrasting. So level 3, you could focus on comparing and contrasting both the efficiency and the types of specifics that exist within cellular respiration and photosynthesis. And then level 4 could be, just creating something with that knowledge, whether that's make up an organism and how they would receive energy, or state which type of energy production is more efficient and why, and make an argument about it. So I'm hoping, I feel like I covered that pretty thoroughly, but if I didn't, please send us another email. I would love that. Or send us another comment. But hopefully that helps. So, and that is a really good sort of topic here. So if you look at grid, sorry, give me 1 minute. So if you think about the grid, okay, you really want this entire grid to be a single unit. So whether you're in chemistry, biology, math, social studies, or language arts, you want this to be what you would consider a single unit. If you start merging units, which is possible, your targets and your standards are going to start to get a little bit mucky, and you're not going to be able to assess them as clearly as you probably want to. So another really cool thing is I've seen language arts teachers make an entire grid out of reading a book. So that's just another example from another subject area where they take a novel that they read and they break it up into the grid so that the students can actually read at their own pace. Or, like, as they read it as a class, they're completing certain segments of the grid. So in terms of breaking those grids up, that's the best answer I can provide, is think about how you want to break that unit up anyway, and then use each unit as a grid. So I don't think I gave you a specific answer, Megan, about which one to choose, because I think that's ultimately up to you. But hopefully I gave you some options you can work with, and some things you can sort of chew on for a bit and work through. So, Katie, did that make sense in terms of breaking up those units? Okay. The same thing works in chemistry, Katie. So if you have that unit on, balancing chemical equations that you normally, but you also normally include in that unit another chemistry topic, whether it's calculating percent yield or something, because you're balancing the equation or something like that, you would want to make that one grid. But if you normally teach them completely separate or with another topic, you'd want to make that another grid. So hopefully that is helpful. These are fantastic questions, guys. I appreciate them.
Good.
Awesome. I'm so glad. Megan's happy, so I'm happy. All right. Yeah, hopefully Katie's happy too, and then we can all be happy.
Yeah, I'm happy.
All right, that's what we want to hear. So let's talk about other things. So in terms of implementation, how are you guys feeling? So I'm just going to ask you this, or you can turn it into a question for me. Are you sort of in your heads questioning anything about, what do I do when a student does this, or how do I get a student to get motivated when they're not working, or how do I implement this piece of the grid, or things like that? So I'm hearing crickets, so that's okay.
I guess one of my biggest concerns is getting my students to work more independently.
Right.
And being able to keep themselves working, and if they get stuck, to develop those coping strategies when everyone in the class is working on different things.
Sure.
Just developing that independence, because that's something that my students in our district, they just struggle with that.
Mine too. I absolutely understand that. And that's something that they're not inherently good at usually. So students by default are not going to be good at sort of seeing an obstacle and trying to figure out how to get over it. They usually, a lot of students, especially in high need schools, say, oh no, there's an obstacle. I'm going to stop working now until someone helps me. So, which I'm sure you've experienced. So something I've incorporated in my classroom is a 3 to me system. So what I force students to do is, if they have a question, they have had to try themselves. They have had to show me they've at least attempted it. And then they also they either have to try it 3 times before they attempt me, or if I'm using geniuses. Do you know what geniuses are? Do you remember me talking about those at all?
Yeah, I remember you talking about that.
Okay, so I will have them say, so when I go to a student, I say, what 3 things have you done to try to solve this? And if they can't tell me what 3 things they've done, I don't help them. So what I say is, I will guide what they should do for that help, but I will not give them sort of like that, the one thing that they want, if that makes sense. So because I want them to understand that they can't just, every time there's a little bit of an obstacle, they can't just say, okay, I need help. I have to stop working right now. So another great thing you can do is teach them to use in an appropriate way. I want to focus on that because this can get hairy or thorny, as Megan would say, if you don't do it correctly. But you can teach them to use each other. So what you can do is you can say, hey, you're working on this. Susie, you're working on this. So Johnny, you just finished that, didn't you? Could you explain to Susie how you solved that problem? Like, even if they're at their tables or working next to someone. So because you know where every student's at, you can find that student sort of in the proximity of them and just create that dialogue so that they're not sort of on that island on their own, if that makes sense. But yeah, the 3 to me thing is a huge one. Talking them through that problem solving. And another really good thing to do, I actually talked about this. I was down in Dayton earlier this week talking to a school district, and so I told them that you should never give a student an answer. You should ask the right question so that they can give you the answer. Does that make sense? Yeah. So what that's called is funneling, and I'm sure you've heard of it, and I'm sure you're probably good at it, so I don't want to insult your intelligence at all. But so what funneling is it's when a student asks you a question, you respond with chunked out scaffolded questions to get them to the more complex answer. So you say, you find out where they're at in their understanding, and then you say, okay, so if you understand that we have 2 oxygen atoms over here and 1 oxygen atom over here, how many total atoms of oxygen should we have on the right side of the equation? If they can't answer that, that's your teachable moment. If they can answer that, you can then move on to the next step of whatever you want them to learn. Does that make sense? Yeah. So answering questions with questions is really good. 3 to me is another technique you can use. And then teaching them to utilize other students or geniuses as resources, not too much. Like, you have to monitor that, be careful with it. But if you can teach them to sort of use each other as sort of scaffolding, that also helps. So I think those are 3 things that might probably answer your question.
Yeah.
Hopefully. But you're absolutely right. And you will also notice, as you make your students more independent with this system, they will be better at that at the end of the year than they were at the beginning. So when you start implementing the system, have you already started, or is this the first year you're trying it?
I've tried it. I've tried something similar.
Okay. Okay.
As like a 1-unit project before.
Gotcha. Awesome. Okay. That's good. So at least you have something to go off of. You kind of know what you're walking into a bit, which is really nice. And I actually get that a lot from teachers. Teachers will say, well, I've done this part of it, or I've done something like this, but I'm hoping that the additional structure and the additional pieces of this will help that vision that you had for that project sort of come to life, and maybe that can be how your classroom runs now. So that would be fantastic. But yeah, that independent thought is absolutely huge, and that's something we absolutely want to foster in all of our students. So I totally understand why that's important to you, and I think that some of those tactics can help you with that. We're coming down to the last about 12 minutes here, but we can hang out longer if we need to. But anything that's scaring you? So you're about to implement this system. So here's a question: have you talked to your principal about this yet?
No.
So that's okay. I didn't mean to scare you with that question. But it is really important if you're going to enter into this new type of instruction that you do inform stakeholders. So hopefully you can see what's on my screen. Yeah. Can they still see my screen? Thanks. So these are the people you're going to want to make sure you tell that you're doing mastery learning and or the grid method. It's easier if you just call it mastery learning, because then they'll ask you might want to call it the grid method. I would like that. But you want to tell, obviously you want to tell your students, okay? Obviously you want to tell parents how you're going to be grading and how their students are going to be working. You want to let administrators know, hey, just so you know, this is how I'm running my classroom. I will tell you right now that principals love when they see a grid. And I've never had a principal. I literally had a superintendent telling me how awesome the grid was the other day, because the entire learning path is laid out, it's targeted, it's self-paced, it's differentiated. So, but the important thing is that when that principal walks into your room, you want them to know what's going on. Does that make sense? So,
yes.
You want to at least let your principal know, say, hey, I'm trying this new thing. This is how it's going to work. So when you come into my class, you might see kids doing a bunch of different things. I will also tell you, in all honesty, that I've gotten perfect scores using the Ohio teacher evaluation system, which I'm sure is very similar to the Michigan teacher evaluation system, and whatever that looks like, because they probably all feed off of the same best practices. So I can tell you that I've had very positive experiences with the evaluation process and sort of checking all those boxes while implementing this system. The other nice part is when you're having an evaluation, it's really nice to be able to tell your principal, you can come in any day, because every day we're working, and every day my students are being differentiated. So in my experience, when you're implementing this system, it takes away the stress of an evaluation, because every day is a lot more consistent than would be if you're just planning a lesson for an evaluation. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So other teachers are also someone you want to talk to. So make sure you fill in your intervention specialist. Make sure you fill in if you co-teach with anyone, and maybe just tell your team, hey guys, I know that we've tried some things in the past, but I just want to let you guys know I'm trying this new thing. because if teachers don't know what you're doing, they may think you're doing something either wrong or you know how that goes with office politics and how everything else. So, I've always said it's better that they know what's going on than anything else. So, in terms of what you want to share with them, you want to share that you're changing your instruction. You want to share that you're going to be using a mastery-based system. You're going to say that students are going to have more control over their pace, and they'll be working on tasks based on their individual progress. And there will be increased individualization and attention. You always want to focus on the fact that the reason you're doing these things is to help increase student learning, and that it might look different for some learners, parents, or principals compared to what they're used to. So you will have parents and students say, well, this is weird, this is different. I have had parents more than not say, why don't the other teachers do this? Because essentially what you get to tell the parents is that your child gets to work at their own pace. Your child gets to learn when they're ready to learn. So parents love that message, and so do principals and everyone else. So always keep it positive. Be confident when you're talking to people, and just, you own it. You seem pretty confident already, so that's probably good. So you can do this in a couple different ways. You can send an email, send a letter. I prefer, so what I would do is when you finish your first grid, I would recommend showing it to your principal. So Katie, do you have to send in lesson plans for your school?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to explain to your principal that your lesson plans are now based on these grids. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what I did when I had to turn in lesson plans is I would take the grid and I would take all the aligning worksheets or activity sheets or materials, and I would put them in like sort of a stack, and I would basically say, here, sir, is my next 2 weeks of instruction or 3 weeks of instruction, depending on the size of the grid. Does that make sense? But make sure your principal is aware of how that grid is made, because I guarantee you, and actually you can send him my email if you want me to explain it to him, because I can do that too. But make sure he understands how you're developing that grid, because once he understands all the work that goes into aligning that grid to the standards and aligning the assessment, I can pretty much guarantee that he's going to be happy about that. So hopefully you agree with me, unless I don't know your principal, so I can't guarantee that, but I have yet to see an administrator.
He's pretty open to, I can kind of try whatever I want as long as
Nice.
I document how it goes and
Absolutely.
report back.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I would, like I said though, if you're going to implement this system, and I don't know if you're planning on doing it for your first unit or maybe waiting until your second unit, I would recommend probably starting earlier on, just so that you can sort of get your students off to the right start, and like train them in the processes a little bit from day one, so to speak, or maybe after the first week, after you get them introduced and everything. You got to play those corny lab safety videos, right? So yeah, so make sure you sit down and you have that conversation with him. Generally speaking, as long as you articulate yourself and you explain it, he shouldn't have any issues with you trying it. So, and the more he knows, the better off you're going to be. That's sort of my rule of thumb.
Okay.
Just make sure he knows that when he walks into your room and you have 3 students doing a lab and the other 2 are on iPads doing something, and this student over here is playing with note cards for vocabulary, that he knows all that's purposeful learning. And in my experience, that learning is more focused, it is more engaged, because once again, and I always talk about this, is when you meet students where they are, they're going to be more focused, because they're not going to be being pushed further than they're ready for, and you're not going to be dragging them through the curriculum. They're going to be assessing and accessing that curriculum at their own pace. So hopefully that answers that question. Is there any who wants to get the last question? That's what I want to know.
Megan said that she's feeling really good about this, very confident. That she is good.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan.
Katie, Katie, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I've been muted, so I want to make sure, but I wanted to make sure that you were aware, and I'm sure Chad was going to say it, but I told Megan the same thing, that obviously we are always available for questions, so just because we're not on the Hangout all the time, just always feel free to email, and Chad's very quick to get back on that type of stuff, so. But we're anxious to see how it works in your classroom this year and help in any way we can, so. Actually, Chad just put his email up on the screen, so that's great, so.
So I more than anything, I want to thank you guys for participating in this hangout. I think that means a lot. You guys are fantastic for joining us, and obviously you care about your students enough to want to improve your instruction. So that's the kind of awesomeness I love to see in teachers, and that's the kind of amazing people I love working with. So what Jeff said is absolutely correct. We have the website where there's a bunch of resources, and you can email me anytime. Okay, if you're struggling with something, I want to know about it. If something's not working, I want to know about it. So I guess what I'm saying is I never want you to think I don't want to bother Chad. He's probably busy, and I am busy, but you're worth my time, and your success and your students are worth my time. So please reach out. Please let me know if you need anything, and I am more than willing to help you in any way that I possibly can. So does anyone have any last-minute comments or questions or smart remarks or anything?
I'm all set, I think.
Okay, so if you think you're all set, I'm going to take that as you are all set. But if you're not, you can easily email me anytime you want, okay?
All right, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for hanging out. I appreciate it. Megan, thank you very much. And anyone else listening, fantastic. Thank you for hanging out with us. And please stay awesome.